Is Stagg the single greatest thing in the universe? I'm Jeff. This is G Whiskey. Stick around. Okay, it's a Stagg today, which is an incredibly hyped whiskey, allegedly one of the best affordable bourbons that money can buy, except that it's not usually affordable unless you know people, because buying stuff in the bourbon world is very silly. Now, if you're like me and you're mostly a Scotch guy, the allocated bourbon scene would be somewhat akin to trying to track down a hard to find Springbank, or really just any Springbank, depending on your market, but worse. Like, it's not just a case of being quick to the draw. You kind of need to know people or have some kind of insider info, or you need to be willing to queue up for hours and hours and hours. Like, you can't just get these. I mean, I guess you can if you're extremely lucky, but I think most people who own a Stagg either have some connections, they put in some effort, or they paid way more than they should have. Now, if you can find this at MSRP, the recommended retail price, it should go for between $65 and $70 typically, but a lot of people have to pay a lot more. I've seen bottles of this selling for as high as $300, even $400 if they're very sought after batches. So it's a jump. As far as I'm concerned, this is the first bottle of Stagg I've either owned or tried. I've heard a lot about it over the years. It's huge on BourbonTube, and it's something I've always wanted to try. But MSRP was never on the table here in Taiwan. It sells for a minimum of 200 US, and I felt that was a little bit high for me. And by a little, I mean a lot, because 200 bucks, that's Scotch money. Or pay my bills money, but I prefer the former. Luckily for me, I'm extremely famous, very well liked, very well connected, people love me, and I happen to have a very generous friend in the United States who visits Taiwan every so often, and he managed to snag a bottle. I guess he knows the right people. He brought it over, and he sold it to me for a crisp $70, which is cool. Anyway, all of that allocated price stuff aside, what do we need to know about this whiskey? Well, it is barrel-proof stuff. It is from the Buffalo Trace distillery. This is made using mash bill number 1, which apparently is a low rye mash bill, rye being less than 10%. It is known to be 7 to 9 years old, although the precise age is not explicitly stated. The batch I have with me here is 24B, and I don't know if that's a well-regarded batch. I did look it up briefly. I think it's kind of in the middle. It's not considered one of the greats or one of the duds either. I'm not really in that scene, but to give the bourbon guys their credit, they are really passionate, they're really generous, and they love sharing info about this stuff. They're really into batch variations, so if you want to learn about that stuff, it's going to be out there. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, I'll admit I've never been super into bourbon, and I always will be a Scotch guy first and foremost, but I have been dipping my toes in the water these last couple of years, and I've tried some rare top shelf type stuff. I've tried some rare Blantons, some Pappies, some Wellers, and I enjoyed them. In fact, I wrote down some notes on some of the better bourbons that I tried, and they are as follows. Damn. So our questions for today is this in that club of top tier bourbons, and is it worth the hype? So stick around and find out. Let's not waste any more time. Let's jump into this review. In the meantime, if you'll kindly leave a like down below, that'd be greatly appreciated. All right, so our specs for this stuff, this comes in at 63.9%, which is stupid and awesome. Now, the last time I looked at a bourbon, it wasn't that long ago, I think it was a Booker's, I realized that the specs that I use for Scotch don't necessarily apply to bourbon. So I asked for help down below in the comments and from viewers, and you guys cooked up some stuff that I should be looking for as quality indicators for a bourbon, and they are as follows. Is it 100 proof? Is it 100 proof or higher? This one is at 63.9%, which, by the way, is 127.8 proof. Does it have an age statement? No, this one doesn't. Is it unfiltered? Yes, it is. Mash bill. Do we have a mash bill? No. So we know it's mash bill number 1 and that it's low rye, but we don't get the exact proportions. Do they give us batch info? Yes, they do. This is 24B. Distillation. Location. So where was it made? We know that it's at Buffalo Trace. It says so on the bottle. Do we have additional info? Yes, we do. It says Kentucky Straight Whiskey, which means we don't have any additives. For our presentation, the look of the bottle, I like that this has kind of a small label. It lets us appreciate the color of the whiskey, which is dark. The antlers, the logo, those are fine. I don't really have any feeling about them, but the bottle does stand out on the shelf, and it does have a sort of, it's got a unique appearance, let's say. We'll give it 3.5 out of 5. In terms of information on the bottle, it says it's uncut and unfiltered. It gives us the batch 24B. It says it's straight bourbon whiskey. It says where it's distilled at Buffalo Trace Distillery. And while this is a no age stated whiskey, our little blurb on the back actually says it's aged for almost a decade. So plenty of good information on this, and the bottle, yeah, it looks cool. On the nose, this is bold and bourbony, which is not a surprise. We get a lot of depth right out the gate. This is very rich and heavy and flavorful. And by flavorful, I mean flavorful on the nose. Lots of nose flavors. Smells, if you're a layman. Which, in other words, means that what I just said is that this smell has a whole lot of smell. Welcome to the wonderful, pretentious world of whiskey reviews. Flavors are, what did I write here? Loads of vanilla, cherry licorice, cherry cola, some semi-bitter oak, some nuts, some pepper, and some floral caramel. It is a very nice nose. On the palate and finish, this is extremely bold and extremely intense. This is not gentle. We get lots of burnt vanilla in here. There's dark caramel, there's butterscotch, and we get some spicy oak. Once again, this is rich and dark. We get some floral caramel and wood flavors. And our finish is long, nutty, bitter with a peppery spice and some lingering vanilla. Okay, so my main takeaway here is that this is a very rich and very heavy and opulent bourbon. I've had some very opulent bourbons before, but I would say that this one is opulentier than most. It is one of the opulentiest. This is not a superficially sweet bourbon, and sure, if you're coming from the world of Scotch, it is a bourbon, it is going to be sweet, but it's not too far in that direction. We have a lot of very heavy base notes that kind of ground it, and we also have these spicy, somewhat bitter counterbalance notes, so it's not too much. Because I'm going to assume that a good chunk of you watching right now, if you're on my channel, you may be a Scotch guy first and foremost, and oftentimes your concern when approaching a bourbon is this going to be too sweet? Which I think differs from a lot of the bourbon guys' approach, because I think on BourbonTube, people look for a lot of very rich, decadent, syrupy notes in their bourbon, whereas I think a lot of us are a little bit sensitive to that. Because based on the few reviews that I did actually read on this stuff, there were a few complaints that this batch in particular was too oaky and too bitter. Now, as far as I'm concerned, those help kind of restrain the sweetness and help contain it a little bit. But if you want more of a syrupy element to your whiskey, I suppose some of the other batches will offer more of that. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the best bourbons I've ever had. I am not a bourbon connoisseur, but I am slowly getting into it. I wouldn't say I'm a bourbon convert, and don't worry, this is a Scotch channel, and Scotch is always going to be the focus here. But I will dabble in bourbon reviews and other alternatives from time to time. I'm going to do that a little bit more this year, maybe once a month or so. And this is one of the better ones out there. Now, it is worth noting that this is not reinventing the bourbon wheel. If you're a Scotch drinker and you're not a fan of bourbon because you think it's the same sets of flavors again and again, it's always, it's oak and caramel and vanilla. This is that. It's not going to change your impression. It's a classic bourbon profile, albeit a low rye one, which I'm fine with. I'm not the biggest rye fan. But as always, it's all about the execution. This is something you should try if you want something really fun and really deep and really intense. That's what she said. So genuinely, I'm impressed with this stuff. I'm thoroughly enjoying this bottle. And as I said, I've tried stuff like Weller's and Pappy's. This is up there with them. And as I said, I didn't love this at first. It did take a while for me to warm up to it. I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was great. And I think it really clicked when I tried this against a lot of the other bourbons that I have, because I have a few bourbons here, not a lot, and almost all of them I enjoy independently. But when I put this Stagg in the side-by-side, it dominated all the other ones. Those other whiskeys, while excellent individually, did start to taste more superficial next to those deep, rich, heavy bass notes that we get in this one. It's all about that bass. All About That Bass is a song released in 2014, so clearly I have my finger on the pulse of pop culture. Tell you what, 11 years old, it's definitely not a contemporary reference, but I've done worse, and it's not bad for a millennial. Anyway, is this a truly epic bourbon? Yeah, I think it is. Is it worth the hype? Sure, I would say so, but the big question is it worth the money, or is it worth the money that you're asked to pay on secondary prices? Obviously, we'll get into value in a moment, but I mean, like I said, secondary market prices for bourbons in the States, silly. Personally, it's not a game that I would play. Of course, if I lived in the States, I would seek out good bottles of bourbon, but I do within reason. I don't think I have it in me to become a bourbon hunter. The amount of effort and groundwork and sexual favors they need to perform just in order to get their hands on a sought-after bottle, it's a lot, it's too much. And honestly, that's not even a bourbon thing. That's more of just a lazy thing. Like, if it's a Springbank, how much effort am I going to put into getting a Springbank? Some, not a lot. Anyway, to sum all this up, excellent, phenomenal whiskey, very, very good. I'm going to score it a 90. I think it's among the best bourbons I've ever had. I think it is a very, very, very solid alternative, and I think it's got a lot more going on, a lot more depth than a lot of other bourbons. And if you're not convinced by that, try it in a side-by-side, and you really will start to notice the difference. I find, just in general, not even with this one, if you want to notice what's good about a bourbon, it's best to try it against other bourbons. That's where you see all this sort of nuanced differences between each of the bottles. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my sage advice for today, and I think that's where we can cap things off. We will touch on value in a moment. Before we do that, I want to say a quick thank you to all my channel members, all my patrons, or even if you're just providing emotional support down in the comments. Thank you, and if you're not supporting but want to, I've got Patreon and PayPal linked down below. Anything and everything helps, blah, 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 blah. Now let's touch on value. So value, allocated bourbon, obviously this is tricky. If it's MSRP, then it's phenomenal. And I can see why this got hyped, because that's what it's supposed to cost. That's the real price of it. It's $65 to $70. And for that, it is phenomenal quality, and I recommend it all day, every day. If you're paying secondary, I don't know, don't. And I'm not just saying that because I have been reading and hearing some stuff recently about how the bourbon boom is coming to an end, and at some point in the relatively near future, prices will start to settle back down and become more reasonable. Now, I hope that's true. I don't know if it is, but if it is, well, that's a bright future for all of us, isn't it? In the meantime, best I can do is recommend this at the recommended retail price, and I hope that if you're paying more than that, it's not too much more. But is it an excellent bourbon? Absolutely. And that brings us to the end of the video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, I want to hear from you. So have you managed to get your hands on a bottle of Stagg before? How did you get it? How much did you pay for it? Did you pay secondary? How did you feel about it? Was it worth it? You can let me know all of that down below. Also down below, you can let me know what you want to see me review down the line, and I will keep that in mind for my upcoming videos. Bye, guys.